Anyway, just moving on. I've entitled the talk "Flogging a Dead Horse." I think that we really are flogging a dead horse in this. The Northern Territory does face economic challenges, and gas and LNG have been touted as a saviour, but the gas industry isn't investing. It's not investing, and the gas-fired recovery is really just an exercise in subsidy harvesting. They've got their hand out at every opportunity. Any industry is economic with enough government support. So can the gas-fired recovery occur? Well, certainly a lot of money can be spent on trying to make it occur. Gas is being overtaken globally by renewables and no longer serves as a transition fuel. And gas expansion comes at a cost to agriculture. So, look, the last 6 weeks have been pretty incredible in terms of the changes that we've seen. Australia's 3 largest LNG export markets are Japan, China, and South Korea, in that order. All have gone net zero by mid-century. China's has gone net zero by 2060. This in effect means that all international gas demand forecasts done just last month are out of date. And gas in Australia will be redirected from international markets into the domestic market over time. The presidential election in the US has been won by Biden, apparently, hopefully. You never know with the US, but it appears to have been won by Biden, and the Democrats are also taking the US to net zero. The EU is looking at putting in carbon border adjustment mechanism from 2023. That is a carbon tariff. A carbon tariff is essentially a carbon tax levied by a foreign government. So it has all the disadvantages of a carbon tax and none of the advantages. Essentially, it means that we'd be paying a carbon tax, but the revenue would be collected by foreign governments. San Francisco has banned fossil gas in new buildings from next year. Victoria's announced a big battery. AGL's announced a big battery. The Grattan Institute, which is a what you'd call a conservative think tank, it lists as its members as sponsors Woodside Petroleum, for example, and the Australian government was one of the founders of the Grattan Institute. They wrote a report written by Tony Wood, who is an ex-Origin employee, and that report was titled "Flame Out: The Future of Natural Gas." And I'll quote directly from the report because it's important what they're saying. They're saying that this report confronts the uncomfortable truth that natural gas is in decline in Australia. The consequences of that reality may be painful for some in the short term, but neither wishful thinking nor denial will serve us well. The only rational approach for governments, the energy industry and its customers is to begin planning for a future without natural gas, or at least with a substantially reduced role for natural gas. So the conservative think tank, the Grattan Institute, is saying that gas is finished as a fuel in the global economy. If we have a look, the Victorian government came out with major energy efficiency initiatives, spending $800 million. The effect of these will be to lower demand for all energy, including gas. They'll be switching a lot of the gas heaters out for more efficient heat pumps, which are electric powered. They'll be switching out gas-fired ovens and stoves for electric ones. So we're going to see a significant reduction in gas demand in Victoria. The household is an important area in Victoria for gas consumption. Historically, with cheap gas out of the Bass Strait, it was encouraged by government to make your households have gas. And so 60% of Victorian consumption is actually in the house. renewables globally are overwhelming fossil fuel and nuclear. We've seen a massive expansion in renewables, and we're seeing a contraction in fossil fuel and nuclear power. There are a couple of interesting things. Both these graphs are on the same scale for a start. And the second interesting thing is that nuclear is really not a feature in the global electricity production in terms of new builds. It really is that tiny little orange line down the bottom of the graph. So for all the nuclear fans out there, it's not really figuring in the global energy system. The other point to note is if you look back at 2001, many more gas plants were being built than coal plants. In 2019, that wasn't true. So gas serving as a transition fuel just simply isn't correct. It hasn't served that role. What we're seeing in the US is a collapse of the fracking industry. I think that's the correct term, is a collapse. The number of operating drill rigs have fallen 60% in the last 12 months. What that means going forward is you're going to see a collapse in production. Shale gas relies on continually drilling to top up your reserves because the wells deplete very quickly. And so we've seen this massive collapse in operating drill rigs, and that means we're going to see a collapse in production in about a year to 18 months' time. Total oil and gas bankruptcies have accelerated, and so far this year, $53 billion in debt has been restructured. That's a pretty big number. We're seeing the global gas glut extend beyond 2028. There's quite massive overcapacity at the moment in LNG. Origin has slashed its drilling program in Australia. The AP LNG joint venture with ConocoPhillips and Sinopec has only drilled 23 wells this year compared with 95 at the same time last year. That's a 76% fall. So we're seeing similar falls in drilling in Australia to those in the US, which will obviously also flow through to production. So these guys are cutting production, they're sacking workers, and they're telling us they're going to be the engine for economic growth. That doesn't add up. If you're going to stimulate economic growth, you should be investing, you should be drilling more wells, and you should be employing more people, and they're doing the reverse. A third of the US shale industry is near technical insolvency, according to Deloitte, and it's never made any money in the past 10 years. EFA came out with a paper saying this a couple of years ago now, that the fracking industry in the US basically hasn't been profitable for the last 10 years. We copped some criticism, and now Deloitte's are coming out with the same conclusion, essentially. Into this really poor gas market, we're seeing a massive expansion to come out of Qatar. They're looking at increasing production by 64% by 2027. Qatar was last year the world's largest LNG exporter. It's now the second largest compared to Australia, but it's right up there with Australia. We're pretty neck and neck as the world's largest exporters, and they're looking at this massive expansion in production. They're